I'm Jaisal Noor for the Real News Network. As the city of Baltimore marks 1 year since the death of Freddie Gray, two police shootings offer us stark reminders of how race impacts law enforcement in this city. On Wednesday, as activists were marking the anniversary of the Baltimore Uprising, police chased and shot 14-year-old African-American teenager Dedric Colvin, who had a toy gun. Police defended their actions, but a witness told WBAL News that Colvin did not point the gun at police and yelled, "It's not real."
He turned towards them. So, yeah, but he wasn't turning the gun towards him. And I'm positive I heard him say, "It's not real."
Well, now joining me to discuss this is Lawrence Brown. Lawrence is an assistant professor at Morgan State University. Thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
So police have strongly defended their actions, saying that there's been 12 homicides over the last week. They are trying to keep guns off the street. Police officers saw a gun and they acted appropriately. Let's just start off by getting your response to that.
Well, I question whether or not they acted appropriately. I think, first of all, this is a 14-year-old kid. Apparently, he was shot one bullet in the back of his calf, from what I'm hearing, his calf muscle. So they're shooting him while running away. And it's sort of the same thing we see with Walter Scott in South Carolina, where this sort of aggressive policing, witnesses have said, well, he raised the gun up and said it's not real, and yet he's still he's still hit with lethal force. Now compare this to a day later, where you have the gentleman in the hedgehog suit who is proclaiming to carry a bomb or to have a bomb on his person, and instead of being shot in 2 minutes, he's given an hour and 40 minutes, walks outside, gets a couple of commands, and then receives 3 non-lethal shots before he receives an actual bullet, whereas Dedric Colvin receives a bullet right away, a real live bullet. So I think what we're asking for and what the community would like to see is equity in policing, so that the same sort of care that they took with the bomber, they will take with our children and take with suspects in the community as well.
And so the police have said, they thought it was a real gun.
Mm-hmm.
They need to get guns off the streets.
Right.
Why would this 14-year-old from East Baltimore run from the police? Why would he be so scared? They were plainclothes officers, but they said they ID'd themselves.
Right. Well, police are trained. Children and a lot of people in the community are not necessarily trained on terms of what to do when dealing and interacting with police. And we have to remember, these officers were plainclothes. So for all this child knew, these are strange men chasing after a strange man and woman chasing after him. And he had to somehow calibrate in his mind whether or not these were A, real police officers, B, he should stop holding what he's holding, and or C, knowing what happened to a Trayvon Martin, knowing what happened to Tamir Rice. I'm sure that's in his mind. He's thinking, I'm holding something that got Tamir Rice killed, and how do I get out of this situation without me experiencing the same thing? So I'm certain that he was in fear for his life, and we're fortunate that he wasn't shot and killed by the police. But I think it calls to mind that these officers in Baltimore City must engage in a much more powerful program of curbing their use of force when it comes to Baltimore City residents. I mean, you have a problem when 80 to 90% of your police officers do not live in Baltimore City and really are not able to understand maybe what happens in the community when the community is interacting with the police. The trust isn't there. People are scared. People are afraid. And so we need to do a much better job. Kevin Davis, our commissioner, is not doing a good enough job building and creating the trust that we need with our children in our streets.
And of course, this incident did not happen in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about East Baltimore and neighborhoods like it. The underlying conditions there, the rates of poverty, and what people need to know about why these type of incidents keep happening over and over again.
Well, you have to start with the fact that East Baltimore is a hyper-segregated, just like West Baltimore. Baltimore is a hyper-segregated city. These are disinvested, red line communities where there's actually a lot of resilience, where there's actually a lot of people who are struggling to make ends meet legitimately, people who are trying to work 2 and 3 jobs. And many times they're criminalized just because they're black and they're poor.
And so, critics might say, what is a cop supposed to do if he sees someone with the rifle or a gun? You know, what if they had let the boy go and there was a real gun and he had shot somebody? You know, wouldn't the community be outraged at police for not acting? How do you respond to those arguments?
I don't think they had to let Dedric Colvin go. I think they could have made sure after giving chase and protecting themselves, you know, really ascertain what type of weapon this was. After they apprehended the suspect, they could have obtained the weapon, verified whether or not it was a real gun or not. They could have confiscated the gun, but I didn't think they had to shoot the child. I mean, if I'm 37 and you're an officer who's a professional and you've been trained, you ought to know how to deal with children without resorting to lethal force. And I think that's the type of policing that we ought to have here in Baltimore City. We ought not be in the business of shooting and potentially killing children in our community. We ought to have ways of non-violently, non-lethally even. I mean, can't police officers carry bean bags or the same device that they shot, non-lethal shot that they used on the white bomber the next day? Why couldn't they use non-lethal shots on this child? So I'm saying there have to be other ways of apprehending, other ways of slowing down, of catching suspects without resorting to shooting and potentially killing a suspect right off the bat. I mean, so that's what I think. Those are the type of questions we have to ask. Do we have to resort to force, deadly force, as a first resort? And I think the answer is no.
And this shooting, it's worth mentioning, came just a few days after the city of Cleveland settled a $6 million federal lawsuit with the family of Tamir Rice, who is another 12-year-old African-American who was shot within 2 seconds of police arriving at the scene. There was reports that he had a gun. So this is not just limited. This discussion is not limited to Baltimore by any means.
No, it isn't. I mean, it's in America, one has to question whether or not black people, black boys, have a Second Amendment right to bear arms. Whether or not we have a right to make mistakes. Whether or not we have a right to break the law without being killed. I mean, in America, if you do break the law, you are supposed to be apprehended and then tried by a judge and jury. We're not saying that people may not be committing criminal acts, but we're saying let's let a judge and jury find out the facts of the case and then sentence a potential, or if found guilty, sentence a particular suspect in that case. But when you shoot and kill on the street, there's no recourse. The child is dead, and it further strains the type of community police interactions that we say we want to have in Baltimore City, that the uprising demanded that we have here in Baltimore City. So this is life and death. I mean, the crime that people may be facing in the community, people don't know in a high crime environment whether they can trust the police to help handle the crime when the police are coming in and immediately using deadly force of this nature. So how can we ever get a handle on crime in these high crime areas when police are coming in with such lethal force? And I think we have to ask that question. We must have better answers from our commissioner on that very thing.
Lawrence Brown, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.